welcome to Lynx Talk. We have a super special episode for you guys today.
Yeah, hey, we've got a great interview with Jordan Wheeler, the talented writer with North of 60. So, yeah, I'm not going to waste any time. Let's get into it. Enjoy.
My wife has cut my hair twice during COVID times.
Oh, yeah?
Both times involved tequila and wine.
Okay, Jordan Wheeler, you were the assistant, then the associate story editor in the first season, and then you were the story editor and eventually moved up to the senior story editor by season 4.
Yes.
And you are also the father of not just one, but 2 of our amazing cast members, one of which we have already interviewed, Courchene, who played Neesa Dééla, and then also
my son, yeah.
And then also Kaya Wheeler, who played your she didn't play your daughter. She is your daughter, but Neesa, who played Neesa Dééla.
Yeah, Cameron auditioned fair and square. I joined, the show. This goes back a while. This is 29 years ago now. But he auditioned fair and square. There was a character, in the early drafts of the scripts that matched his age. Mm-hmm. So I asked the producers, would it be an idea for my son to audition, and they were like all for it because I was working with the show. That he would show up on time and stuff like that. Uh-huh. He had a different sister on the show initially than OJ, Sequin OJ's little sister. Her older sister was in Legend of the Falls back in the day.
Oh wow.
But the little girl set can be an intimidating place, and she was 4, and we have some first ADs are kind of pretty alpha male, scary guys, and she one day just did not want to go in front of the camera, so they had to, the way I remember it, they had to bribe her with the promise of a Barbie doll house to get the shot, and then they fired her. And but they knew I had a daughter the same age, and because it was her actual brother who would be on set, they approached me and said, would it be okay for your daughter to assume this role? And I had to clear it with my ex-wife to see if she was okay with that. Yeah. And then on she went, and then they kind of became set rats for a while. The ADs had chased them away from craft services because they were always going for the candy. And yeah, so that we stayed with the show for the first 4 seasons, and then I moved on, and I think they went back and did one more episode between them, and that was that. They've still, Cameron went to film school at Capilano University, so they've moved on, and behind the camera, my daughter Kaya works at the National Screen Institute, coordinating Indigidocs and other programs there, so they've stayed within the industry to a degree. Yeah. Kaya also worked at Manitoba Theatre for Young People for a while. Cameron was in camera departments for a while, and actually hired him as part of the crew and did some screenwriting workshops in Banff years ago. So they've carried on with it, and now my stepchildren are getting into it. The youngest one is just finished, or is finishing her 4th year at Ryerson in media production, and the middle stepchild has become a set dresser. She was set dresser on a Sean Penn film that they shot in Winnipeg here a couple of years ago. Wow. Things are starting to open up with the production industry here because of COVID. So they've got some stuff lined up. So yeah, a family affair.
That's awesome.
And my wife, we're both freelance writers, so we've been working through this whole time doing what we normally do. We work at home, just usually not this much at home.
Oh yeah. So, how did you get started on the show? Were you involved with the creation, or?
To a degree. I mean, it was, Barbara and Wayne pitched, I think, 15 different ideas to the CBC. They had a development deal with Alliance, which is now Entertainment One, I think. And CBC liked the show about the White Cop going up north. Initially, it was going to be in Inuit country, Inuit territory. They wanted to shoot it above the tree line. But at that time, the infrastructure in Iqaluit or anywhere up there couldn't support a series of this magnitude. Yeah. And then they're looking for places to shoot it, and the West Coast was off the table because the West Coast always looks like the West Coast. Yeah. We tried to work it around that as much as we could in Arctic Air, but the CBC said we didn't buy a show set in the West that looks like the West Coast. We bought a show for the North, so they The producers in Alberta, because when we started developing the stories, we didn't even have a title for the show yet, and we didn't know where we were going to shoot it. But the producers who came on board in Alberta found that in Kananaskis country, in the foothills, it was kind of a geological match for the southwest corner of the Northwest Territories, in and around the Jean Marie River and those places. So that became the location. I got hired on. It was 1992. So you have to remember back then, Oka Summer had just happened.
Yeah.
The Beach Liquid Court and Elijah Harper just happened. The word appropriation had made it to the mainstream, so they made the decision that they needed an Indigenous person in that room.
Yeah.
So there was, at that time, there was 5 Indigenous writers who had written drama that made it to prime time broadcast, and they looked at all the work we'd done. It was all boys at that point. It was me, Ben Cardinal, Drew Taylor, Michael Dockstader, Duke Redbird, and they looked at all the work that we'd written, and the independent half hour that I had written at that point, based on a novella I'd written, was closest in terms of tone and style and feel to what they had envisioned for North of 60. So I literally got a phone call out of the blue asking if I would come onto the show as an intern.
Oh, yeah.
X number of dollars a week. I was making a lot more doing what I was doing here as a freelance writer. I just finished editing a newspaper. I was doing workshops in the schools through the Manitoba Arts Council. But I kind of, it was an interesting prospect.
Something
And,
kind of called you to it, huh?
I had to pick up and go to Calgary from Winnipeg, because Winnipeg is my home.
Oh, yeah.
So, and
Yeah, it's good travel from there.
The ex-wife made it clear that there's no guarantee she was going to follow me out there.
Oh, wow.
Had she not have, Cam would not have been in the show.
Oh, yeah, no doubt.
But she did, and the carrot that they dangled, was intern wages plus per diem. But they said if you show you have the capacity, you might be able to write a script. And then I started doing the math and got an idea of what the actor rates were at that time. I think the writers were still part of ACTRA at that time. We split off and became the Writers Guild of Canada at some point. But then it was almost a lottery. It was, a fair amount of coin for a younger man. And it was an interesting opportunity, something I hadn't done before. I'd written a few films, worked on films on cruise and stuff since 1984. But I kind of, in the back of my mind, I kind of knew that this was going to be something. Nobody knew it was going to be a hit. Nobody knew if the audience would respond. Nobody knew it would go 6 seasons. But it was a roll of the dice. But I'm glad I did it, and it worked out.
Yeah, it sure did.
Facebook group North of 60 there. It's there's a lot of fans that know way more about the show than I do now. 29 years ago, trying to rattle around the cobwebs in the memory banks.
Yeah, you never thought you'd have to remember it, eh?
Are there any cast members that you're still in close contact with?
Yeah,
other than your kids?
Some of them, even before North of 60, myself, Tina Keeper, Renee Morrisseau, Tina's sister Joy, the late Pauline Riley. We used to do skits, because Tina went to theater school and I was an emerging writer and stuff, and there's a youth organization or an organization in Winnipeg called Mama Wichita. And they put on these youth conferences a few times a year, and they would hire us to do a skit for about 10 minutes on the issue that they're going to be tackling, so that it would be an impetus for discussion. And so, and I remember one time Tina couldn't do one, so we brought her in to have a look at what we were doing, to give us a third eye, and she was giving some direction to her sister Joy and saying, maybe in this moment here you should try a bit more desperation. And she just went into this look. She just nailed this look of desperation at one point. And I was kind of blown away. So when I was in the early stages of story meetings in downtown Toronto in the spring of 1992, they wanted Tantu Cardinal to play Michelle.
Oh.
But and kind of wrote the character for her. They already had Tom Jackson in mind. But Tantu didn't want to sign on for the 3-year option. She had some feature films, and so she didn't want to commit to that. And then they scrambled. Then they had no idea. And I remember the casting person at Lynx coming over to me with a list of people that are going to audition, and Joy Keeper was on the list. And I said, if you're going to audition Joy, you got to audition her sister Tina. And I don't see Renee Morrisseau on this list, so you should probably add her. And then, very quickly, Tina Michelle. And we're still, we're still working on the project to this day. Our kids are all the same, Tina, Joy's sons are the same age as my daughter Kaya. So yeah, we've been, and Renai is just still, Renai's is still a good friend. We stay with her and we go up and visit Vancouver periodically.
Yeah, Cam was saying that Renee and Tina were pretty much like his aunts.
Yep. Yeah. And Tina used to live one street over from where I live in Winnipeg, but she moved south of the river.
Oh. So
And
wow,
I still read
imagine.
it in the festivals. I mean, pre-COVID times, the Imaginative Festival, the Dream Speakers Festival would bring in. So you'd run into people. Last time I hung out with Augie Schellenberg was at Dream Speakers. I remember driving when I was doing Renegade.Press.com in Regina. I used to do Winnipeg, Regina back and forth a lot. And I remember going through Moosomin, Saskatchewan, back when the highway went through town before they diverted it around.
Oh
And I
yeah.
remember going by that chicken shack and looking across the highway, and I thought, is that Augie Schellenberg? Standing on the edge of the road in Moosomin, Saskatchewan. So a few years later, when we were sitting down, I said, hey, were you in Moosomin a few years ago? I remember driving down the highway. He said, yeah, we went to Club Chicken. And, Lauren Cardinal remains a good friend, and even, spent time with Ben Cardinal since then as well. We played two characters in North of 60. He was the poacher who strung up Michelle in episode 7, and then the plane crash and strung up Eric in episode 24, right? An episode that I wrote, and can't remember the character's name off the top of my head, but he came back later on in season 5 or 6 as a
Yeah, he was
an
like
activist.
an activist. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I remember that. But so imagine the whole series with 10-2 Cardinal as Michelle. I mean, that would have changed things a lot, hey?
It would have been, yeah, I mean, she's a great actor. She was in Winnipeg. I think she just flew off. She just got a role in something else. But I think it worked out for the best because we brought her back as...
Yeah,
Yeah,
I was going to say,
exactly.
she did Betty Moses as...
There's a run of episodes there, leading up to finding out that Hannah died, that I would put up against any dramatic sequence of episodes of any show ever. It was some pretty powerful stuff. Those two did some great work in some of those episodes.
I loved Tina Keeper in those episodes. It was just amazing. And I loved how Selena comes back afterwards to kind of visit Michelle. It's nice.
Yeah. That's indigenous culture stuff. There's, things that we just accept as reality. Spirits exist. Our ancestors are always around us. Sasquatch is real. Little people are real. Those are given in the indigenous community. So, and that's why I approached that episode where Gabe Cooley died in the airplane. I didn't give any other possible scientific explanation. So you saw a ghost. It is what it is.
Yeah. Yeah, well, that was one of the cool things about the show is that there was that angle that other shows just didn't have, right? I mean...
Yeah, until then, I think there was Jesse on the Beachcombers, and before that, Dan George on Caribou Country, but there wasn't a lot of indigenous content in television episodic.
No.
There's some feature films done, and Dan George had some great characters in Outlaw Josie Wales and Little Big Man. George Clooney was doing a lot of acting back then, but this was the first in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
What is your favorite behind-the-scenes moment?
Wow. There's a few. I mean, some of them involve my kids because it was just great having my kids on set, although rather than drag them home, sometimes the AD would just throw them into the story department when they were done, and the other writers didn't always appreciate having these kids around their offices. Behind the scenes, it's hard to pick just one, and it has been 29 years. I mean, for me personally, it was interesting because I was 27 when I got hired, and the location in west of Bragg Creek, along the Elbow River in Kananaskis country, it was on a floodplain along the Elbow River, and up the hill, across the road, and up the hill again was a place called Camp Horizon. It was a camp for deaf people.
Oh.
And 10 years before production, I was in a youth exchange program called Canada World Youth. And I went to Indonesia for 3.5 months and spent 3.5 months in Alberta. And our orientation camp, 2 weeks, bringing the Indonesians in and all the Canadians in, because it's, groups of 14 people go out to the communities, but we were a large group. Our orientation was at Camp Horizon.
Wow.
Across the road from what became the set of North of 60. So we used to take walks down in that floodplain and swim in that river. Glacial waters, it was really cold. But 10 years, the week after that, we started production in that location. So for me, it was like, whoa, I guess I'm where I'm supposed to be.
Yeah.
So that's not exactly a behind the scenes thing, but on a personal level, it was kind of a full circle element. And
Yeah, well, it's the same
Indigenous
thing.
narratives, we go with that circular storytelling structure. So it kind of told me that I was where I was supposed to be.
What made you know it was time to kind of leave the show?
I was born in 1964, and I was with the show for 64 episodes. 4 is a sacred number in the Indigenous community, and I was with the show for 4 seasons.
Mm-hmm.
But I guess, and I shouldn't get into too much detail about this, but there was one of the producers who came on and kind of took over a lot of the creative elements. Our political worldviews didn't line up. He was a bit right wing and a social Darwinist, and I kind of felt he was imposing those views onto the show. And I didn't want to stick around for that.
Yeah, well, I mean, you don't want, you obviously want to be able to make it the way you want to, right?
Yeah, and he was a superior, so he wasn't always listening to my protests and the stuff. And I probably said too much about that.
Okay, well, you enjoyed the time you were there. You had,
Yeah, I think when I did leave the show, the producers wanted a reason, and I told my agent, I just don't want to work with this guy anymore. And she said, well, I don't think we can say that. So she made up something, and I'm not even sure what she told them. That's why I left.
Oh, that was a long time ago, right?
Yeah, that was 1995, so 26 years ago now.
Yeah.
I went on to a show called The Res, and went on to do a lot of other stuff, and I'm still, like I said, I was up till 4 in the morning rewriting a feature-length film that I'm co-writing with a guy in Wales. Awesome. So I knew he was, stamping at the bit, morning his time, and I'm burning the late night candle, but it all worked out. He's happy with what I did, and he's going to make some adjustments and send it back to me. So after my early afternoon nap and before the Jets hockey game, I'll get to go through it one more time.
Oh yeah.
Other than that, what else have you been up to since leaving North of 60?
Been on some shows like RenegadePress.com. I was a showrunner on with Rob DeLint. Worked on Arctic Air, big series, but also a lot of freelancing for other shows, and a lot of shows that went into development that never quite made it to screen, which is what I've been doing for the last number of years. Been working on a lot of stuff, and currently working on a lot of stuff, about 6 or 7 different projects in various stages of development.
Wow.
Hopefully something gets greenlit for camera, because it's been a while. I've also teach it as well. I've taught at Capilano University, Brandon University, University of Winnipeg, the BAP Center. I teach for the National Screen Institute. I have taught for Film Training Manitoba. I was also writer-in-residence at the Winnipeg Public Library for a year, a couple of years ago, so that was fun too. And I'm not just a television writer. I also keep one foot in the literary world, so I still write a bit of poetry, and I still sometimes write opinion pieces for various journalistic platforms. So I try and keep all my writing muscles not so much taut, but not atrophied.
What's your favorite project that you're currently working on then?
I'm not going to choose, because that will, I don't want to pick favorites. It's like having children, right?
Is there one that you're more excited for, or you think that's going somewhere more currently?
I love them all, but in terms of the one that looks like it has the best chance is a project called Raven Falls, which came out of a few students I was teaching at the Weengush Film School in Chuging First Nation in Manitoulin Island a few years ago. A few of the students came up with this as a web series, And they had the school brought in. I worked with them as a writer and helped them develop it. And then later on, they brought in somebody from a production company to help them teach them production. And they just happened to see this document and had a look and went, "Hey, this is pretty good." And then it started. So we're still developing that, and I've written an outline for the pilot. So hopefully within the next couple of weeks, hopefully we'll get greenlit to write the pilot as a script and hopefully impress, and hopefully get it sold and get it on TV.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, we'll be looking out for it.
Yeah.
There's a spiritual element to it, so it's something that we thought Trickster would sort of lead the way for us, but Trickster's now gone away. So, but now there's a dearth. Now they need that content. So we're hoping we get in there.
Yeah, well, we look forward to it, definitely. So it's been really nice talking to you, meeting you.
Thanks for having me on. I've been catching your show and catching you guys on the Facebook group. So it's like, ooh, when am I going to get on there?
Well, definitely you had a lot of interesting insight that we wouldn't have known about if we didn't talk to you, that's for sure.